Good morning, everyone, or good afternoon, actually. I am in the same time zone as you. And I'm really pleased to see several of you on our call. We have a robust agenda, but I'm glad you didn't decide to take a snow day. So welcome to the council members. Today, we have many updates and new items for the council. Beginning with an update on bridging plans to practice. Then we move to acquiring knowledge, more knowledge about Connecticut's comprehensive literacy framework. And then we're actually going to start our focus a little deeper on understanding the science of reading from an instructional practice lens for students receiving special education. Kati, let's begin with roll call, please.
Thank you, Ellen. Dr. Matthew Conway. Dr. Michael Coyne.
Here.
Thank you. Dr. Margie Gillis. I see you, Margie, but I can't hear you.
Sorry, I'm here.
That's okay, thank you. Stephen Hernandez.
Steve is here. Thank you.
Thank you. Dr. Melissa Hickey.
Here.
Gary Highsmith. Yasmin Nithir Vicente.
Here.
Thank you. Dr. Tamu Lucero.
Here.
Thank you. Dr. Ashley Oldham.
Here.
Thank you. Chandra Scott Brown. And Dr. James Sabadanchek.
Here.
Thank you. Oh, I see Gary. 1 second. Gary, can you see us? I just see you right now.
Yeah, my mic and my camera were disabled, but I'm good now, it looks like.
Okay, perfect. Thank you so much. Roll call is now complete.
Thank you, Kati. The next order of business is to accept the minutes from our most recent meeting on December 16th, 2025. Do we have a motion to approve the minutes? I believe Kati sent previously, dated December 16th, 2025.
I'll move that.
Dr. Oldham, thank you. And a second?
I'll second that. This is Steve.
Thank you, Mr. Hernandez. And do we have any discussion on the motion from the council members? Hearing no motion for discussion and seeing no raised hands, all in favor of approving the minutes, please use the raise hand button on your screen. Okay, if you can turn that button off, but if you are opposed to approving the minutes for any reason, please now use the raise hand button. Dr. Gillis, just double checking.
No, I'm trying to lower my hand. It's not cooperating. Thank you.
Yes, we're having a little snowy glitch, I think, technologically. Okay, thank you all. Kati, the next agenda item is council members' comments and insights. Have we had any council members sign up in advance for this?
Hi, Ellen. No, we did not.
Okay, thank you. Moving right along at 1:04. I think that's a great amount of time that we have ahead of us to focus on our presentations today. So, Dr. Hickey,
all right.
ball
Thank
goes
you.
to you.
Thank you so much. Mine is more of just a touch base back to this mandated implementation review process. We've talked about it the last few times we met about the document for the self-eval that is going to be posted soon to the website. So we will update you when that occurs. And then from that, we've been building out a process, a collaborative process to work with districts where they would first use that self-evaluation and meet with the center members and talk about next steps and looking at what many people call a challenge or a problem of practice and doing supports around that. It would include some classroom walkthroughs. As you recall, Matt did say that he would be interested in being a pilot district. We are looking for 2 more districts who would be interested in doing so. So I just wanted to do an all call here. If you know of anyone or if your district is interested, if you could please email Kati, that would be most lovely and appreciated. Any questions around that review process update? Tamu.
Stanford would be happy to help if that would be helpful.
Yes, thank you. That would be great. So that's 2. Thank you, Tamu. All right, we'll get back to you on that. Now, for some reason, I can't see people's images. We were having an issue before. If you are trying to have your camera shown, but you can't see it, we found clicking on the camera button and then clicking it again actually does work. If you're deliberately doing it, then that's fine. But I just want you to know that we were having problems when we were first getting on. All right, I'm going to now kick the ball over to my amazing team members, colleagues, who will be talking about the Connecticut Comprehensive Literacy Framework. So I'm going to ask them to introduce themselves and then just tell me when to advance the slides.
Thanks, Melissa. Good afternoon, and thank you for providing this opportunity for the center to present to you 2.5 years of work on developing a comprehensive literacy framework for the state of Connecticut. My name is Deirdre Savarese, and I'm an associate education consultant with the center, and I've been working with Melissa for about 2.5 years.
Good afternoon, everyone. I am Erin Edwards. I am also an associate education consultant within the center and have been working right alongside my colleagues for about the same amount of time and looking forward to sharing information with you today.
Again, we want to thank you. You can go back to, actually, Melissa, if you don't mind, back to the first slide. Again, wanted to thank you for this opportunity to share with the council a draft of some really critical literacy work that the center has been collaboratively pursuing with the Office of Early Childhood. So missing on this slide is really the frame, the context for this framework, which is Birth to Grade 12. So it is an effort to create a continuum of, if you will, of what Connecticut believes comprehensive literacy should look like and what the components of that should be. We began this effort about 2.5 years ago, and it began as an effort to investigate the federal government's support of comprehensive literacy, but has evolved into the development of a literacy framework for the state of Connecticut that, again, spans that full birth to grade 12 spectrum. You may know from your own reading and research that the vast majority of states in this country have some form of literacy framework, whether they call it a plan or some form of policy that culls together the policy, the legislation within each state that supports a coherent plan for evidence-based literacy systems and instruction. And as you might guess, all of these, their ultimate goal is to improve student outcomes for all students throughout the states. Since early 2025, the center has worked diligently with the U.S. Department of Ed, one of the partners, one of the entities within there, as well as with ENSEL, working through research, working through analysis, and following the National Progress on Literacy reform, so that what we have hopefully in front of you represents what we've gleaned to be the best practices and the most effective path towards improvement. So we want to share with you today, this is still in draft form, what the structure of the framework will look like. We also want to, that is one purpose of our presenting today. We also want to, there is an ask towards the end of our slide presentation here that will be framed as a request for Connecticut stakeholders to provide to us what they feel is really important for the state to conceptualize as what comprehensive effective literacy is. Okay, Melissa.
And so as we move through these next few slides, we really want to build the context and give you the background knowledge behind our thinking, not only in terms of what a framework is, but also its purpose. So as you're reading on this slide, I want you to really pay attention to those key terms, those bolded terms. So a state's literacy framework defines its approach with the primary goal to improve students' literacy learning. This can be done through shifts in instruction, as well as through strategies that support both our educators and our leaders. You will also note that many of the plans that we have researched and that we are looking to include within our plan really stress the importance of preparing our pre-service educators and then intentionally involving our families and caregivers in literacy education, which we know are two critical components. And as we move throughout our presentation, in the second half of our presentation, we are really going to delve into those components of effective literacy instruction. And you will notice how these bolded terms align with those components in terms of high quality evidence-based literacy instruction, preparing our pre-service educators, and also you'll see that critical component of families and caregivers. Melissa, you can go ahead and move on to that next slide. Thank you so much. All right, so as we move through these next slides, the purpose of these next slides is to really put into context the framework into the broader agency vision, policy, and priorities. So we are going to start kind of at the top, working from the broadest, and then go down to our narrowest, which will be our Connecticut core literacy beliefs. And what we are aiming to show you is how this comprehensive literacy framework is going to fit within each of those contexts. So starting with the State Board of Education Comprehensive Plan, and also, as Deirdre spoke, the focus of this framework is really on that birth to 12 space. So in addition to the focus on the comprehensive plan from the State Board of Ed, being that we are working with two separate agencies, there is also a focus on the Office of Early Childhood guiding document, the Blue Ribbon Panel report. Melissa, you can head on to that next slide. All right, so at that top, very broad level is our State Board of Ed comprehensive plan. And within that plan, we have strategic priorities. Now, we know that improving literacy outcomes is key to improving all aspects of our educational system. And you can see within these priorities, we're focused on school climate and culture, to retaining educators, to strengthening those family connections, as well as providing that high quality instructional materials and instruction across our literacy spectrum, birth to grade 12. So the comprehensive literacy framework addresses these goal areas through that lens of effective literacy systems, and thus will help to support not only our State Board of Ed's long-term goals, but also the Office of Early Childhood long-term goals. You can go ahead and advance that slide. Thank you.
So moving down from the broadest macro level, as we get narrower, we, through careful consideration, are finding that this comprehensive literacy framework not only aligns with the broadest goals of the State Board of Ed and the Blue Ribbon Panel, but also with the current priorities that have been established through the CSDE as well as the Office of Early Childhood. Would you advance one, please? What you're seeing here is the infographic that our commissioner has published that encompasses the CSDE's priorities for this year. If you make your way around the wheel, if you will, again, similar to what Erin highlighted as the strategic board priorities, you can imagine how a comprehensive literacy framework is going to touch and impact all of these specific areas. And again, with the goal of every student prepared for learning, life, and work beyond school. Go ahead, Melissa. Thank you.
And so as we continue to move down from our state plan down to each office's strategic priorities, we now want to bring in what is in draft form, our Connecticut core literacy beliefs. So Melissa, if you can move to that next slide. Now, these beliefs come directly from work with our interagency expert advisory team. So we have compiled an agency advisory team that consists of our other center colleagues. It consists of other colleagues within the Department of Education, as well as the Office of Early Childhood. Dr. Coyne, who is a member of this council, has served on this expert advisory team as well. And throughout meetings with this team, we have begun to develop what we are calling our Connecticut core literacy beliefs. So what do we believe that all students must have, and what do all Connecticut learners deserve in regards to literacy? Now, this is in draft form, but you will see throughout our beliefs key terms like fundamental right for all. We also are focusing on that spectrum, like Deirdre was talking about, that birth to grade 12 spectrum. So literacy begins at birth and develops along a continuum, beginning with oral language and then expanding as you move across the grade band levels and encounter more complex tasks and texts and contexts. We also are stressing the importance that literacy empowers individuals to think critically and make informed choices, be able to advocate for themselves and others. And then you'll see as we move down, what are the things that we believe Connecticut learners deserve? They deserve access to equitable, skilled educators from birth to grade 12. We want them to have high quality language and literacy materials, as well as that explicit systematic instruction that is informed through data. We want them to have safe, nurturing learning environments with high expectations for all learners, and then active educational partnerships with families, caregivers, and the broader community. And as you're looking through this draft set of beliefs, hopefully you can start to see the connections tying back into that broader context of the State Board of Education plan, as well as the strategic priorities from both of our agencies. You can go ahead and scroll.
I'm going to acknowledge one quick second, and then we'll take a question here.
Yep.
I want to acknowledge quickly that Dr. Coyne has been integral in helping us frame a lot of this thinking. He has served on our expert advisory team and also worked very closely with the center at the beginning of 2025 when we sought to apply for a literacy grant from the federal government. So we want to thank him right at the outset here for his thoughts on helping us establish this foundation. Mr. Hernandez?
Thank you so much. And I know that you're probably like on slide 4, but I have to tell you, this is so incredibly exciting and sophisticated. You know, the fact that you've linked it to K-12, that you're working with the Office of Early Childhood, that you've mentioned parents at the beginning of the presentation, the role of community, you know, it just shows that we're not far behind anywhere else in the country when it comes to a structure and, you know, a way to proceed what we know and what we know is important in terms of elements. Where we are far behind is in the legislature funding this to full capacity and scaling it across the state. So I just always want to underscore that, because I think that the commissioners linking this to a whole life approach around the wheel makes absolute sense, and it's critical. So again, it's an opportunity again to say to the people who make decisions about budgets that they need to fund this at every level. So thank you so much.
Thank you for acknowledging that. That was very encouraging and just great to hear. We really appreciate it. It really validates the work that we've been doing and the way that the center is thinking about literacy, really birth to 12. So we are finally on this slide where the star now has finally come to the bottom of the comprehensive literacy framework. So again, you will see going from the broadest all the way down to the narrowest way to view this, that the framework really does meet and match and live within the strategies and priorities that the state as a whole has developed for student learning in the state. If you wouldn't mind, Melissa, the next slide. Just to really make this simple for anyone who has not had a lot of interaction with state literacy plan and their purpose, this slide attempts to just simplify and make precise and concise what it is that what we hope the framework will do. I'll be reading the first one, and you feel free, please, to go ahead and read the others. I don't need to read to you, but the real purpose here is it's continuous literacy improvement across the entire spectrum of student learning. It defines and coordinates Connecticut's approach to comprehensive literacy instruction so that anyone that is asked in the state about what Connecticut believes to be comprehensive literacy instruction can refer back to this kind of document and or thinking that well defines it. We are excited in that it gives us an opportunity to work with our partners in the Office of Early Childhood. We have a phenomenal dynamic relationship with the group there who is equally as committed to this work as we are. Unfortunately, she wasn't able to be with us today, but the commitment is there from her level all the way to the top. Again, also really important to include all of Connecticut's stakeholders in this process, because what we at the state level, we can't anticipate fully what it is that different stakeholders need and require for literacy throughout the state. Ultimately, this becomes an implementation guide so that what is developed at the state, there are processes for continuous improvement that will be mirrored ultimately at the local level through our various districts and schools. And again, as we've talked about, and thank you, Mr. Hernandez, for acknowledging, this document supports Connecticut's drive to remain at the forefront of national policy. We were out there right at the beginning, and we want to remain so. There are more than 40 states in the country right now that have something like this, and we want to make sure that we're part of that majority. Go ahead and flip, please. So we're going to stop for just a second, and before we move on to the more nitty-gritty of the components of literacy instruction, to see if anyone has questions about what we've presented so far, about the purpose, about the work to date. Melissa?
I don't have a question so much as, some of you may be wondering, why is it called a framework? And the reason is, well, there's many reasons, but one is this council assisted in creating the K-3 strategy. And then the council assisted in creating the K-12 strategy that's still in the review process. And then the council also assisted in making a literacy plan for the center. So we've got strategy out there, we have plan out there. What we don't have yet is a framework, a literacy framework. So that's why it wasn't easy to land on this name, but we felt like it really did capture what the end product is going to be, and the products that we've all created along the way as a council. Do you want to talk about that, Erin and Deirdre, the strategy and the plan?
Absolutely. Absolutely. So I think when you're thinking about, for further context, when we're thinking about the strategy versus the framework that we are proposing, and when we get into more specific details, as Deirdre said, moving forward in the presentation, I think you'll see not only are we trying to build upon the strategy, the depth-wise, but also breadth-wise. So it does take into account that birth to grade 12. So we are expanding down to that critical component of early childhood and how that is serving as the foundation and the basis on which to build upon your future literacy learning, and the critical importance of those early language and literacy skills. In addition, when we're thinking about this framework, as you'll see as we move through, we are also taking the strategy and expanding in terms of our stakeholders that we are hoping to support. So you will see within each of our components of effective literacy instruction, not only is there going to be a focus on leadership and administration, like the strategy focuses upon in terms of our audience, but there is also going to be a focus on educators and classroom educators, as well as what can the state do, as well as those critical component of what can our literacy coaches do. So our coaches that we know are so critical moving forward as we're implementing and improving our literacy instruction. And so really the framework is not only expanding the grade span and the age span, but also expanding the support to different stakeholders within the educational kind of ecosystem. And Deirdre, I didn't know if you wanted to add anything onto that.
Yeah, I would also just add one other thing. We have to give a very encouraging nod to the Office of English Learner, Multilingual Learner folks at the CSDE. They poured their heart and soul into creating a framework for English language multilingual learners. And the conceptualization they had of a framework was very much something that we grounded our work in. A framework concept, as well as the establishment of certain roles that had different responsibilities and tasks assigned to them. Ultimately thinking, if there is a framework in place within the CSDE that has been approved and is applauded, that we want to build on what is already deemed to be successful within the agency, so that we are crafting again this collaborative interagency effort that holds more of a chance of being successful in its implementation. Go ahead, Erin.
Excellent. So hopefully in that first part of the presentation, we have hopefully provided the context and given you some background knowledge in order to understand as we move forward. Now we'll focus on more of the specifics in terms of what is this framework going to look like and what is the content that it's going to be comprised of. So as you look here, you can see that across what we are proposing for our framework structure, there's kind of three separate components, and we've kind of delineated them by color. So in the first section of the framework, we'll live our foundational components, which will include things like how does this framework, how is it supported by legislation and related policies? How are we're really one of the critical kind of goals is to kind of bring together all of the literacy initiatives that are happening throughout the state. And so really within that foundational component, we will focus on how are we bringing together and aligning the existing state initiatives surrounding literacy. And then also within that foundational component section, we'll live the needs of all students. So what are the needs of all of our students from a variety of data points? So not only will we be looking at testing data, we will also be looking at, as Deirdre will speak to in a minute, we have launched a comprehensive landscape survey that we have sent out to a variety of stakeholders. So we're hoping to get inputs that way as well that will then inform the plan moving forward. So that foundational component section will be first, followed by what we are calling our evidence-based framework. And Deirdre will start to explain what those components are on the next slide. But really that is what we are proposing as an effective evidence-aligned framework for literacy that will include specific goals and action steps for each of those stakeholder categories that I previously spoke on, which includes leadership, which includes classroom educators, literacy coaches, as well as the state level. And then finally, when you look at that orange coloring, we're thinking about implementation. So again, as Deirdre said, one of the main priorities of this plan is that we are constantly involved in that continuous improvement cycle. So we are really hoping while we are proposing a first rendition of this comprehensive literacy framework, we are really seeing it as something that will be iterative and will continue to develop. So what does that implementation and continuous improvement look like at both the local and the state level? And then what are the resources and tools that we as a state can help to provide you to support that plan across the age bands? You can go ahead, Melissa, and scroll to that next page.
So what you're seeing here is what was an attempt at making a wheel that shows not a sequential order of components of effective literacy instruction, but a way in our effort to show you how they interact. So around the wheel, what we're calling our 7 essential components are practices that have been supported by evidence, in some cases research, that are grounded in those two primary things. We have analyzed these across national lines by looking at virtually every state's national literacy framework or plan, and have identified the 7 components from that analysis that most directly meet the context of Connecticut. That takes into account where we are at in terms of policy and legislation, but also where we are at in terms of student need and evidence-based literacy instruction. They are designed to interact intentionally and build momentum at the same time. Our feeling being that in order to sort of have that perfect end state, if you will, theoretical end state, all of these components have to be in place in some maximized form. We had hoped to contextualize it this way to suggest that certain districts may be ahead in one area and need work in other areas. So it allows for districts and schools at the local implementation level to enter where their biggest needs are according to their context. So there is no order to it. You do not have to have one in place before the others can be effective, but it allows that flexibility. These are also then at the same time consistent with what other states have identified as their literacy priorities. So I'm just going to start from the top and in no order of priority. The 7 components begin up at the top with prepared future literacy educators. So without the strength of well-prepared students coming out of our educational preparation programs, we would otherwise be beginning a student's learning outcomes in a way that doesn't begin with a solid foundation. So from there, we are moving through the significantly important role of engaged families and communities as part of what makes for effective literacy instruction and learning. In order for this framework to be successful, we need to have effective literacy leaders who are well informed about literacy to the extent that they are able to prioritize it among their staffs and know what to look for when they see it in the classroom so that they can truly become instructional leaders. Tied to all of that is continuous professional learning at the in-service educator level. This would be literacy instruction that is grounded in high quality instructional materials, of which Connecticut obviously has some great evidence in place already with the K-3 approved menu. And then effective literacy instruction for all, which is again grounded in research and in the evidence that supports what are those practices that are designed to generate the most important changes in instruction, so with a focus on the teacher, so that student learning outcomes can be improved. Again, to this point, and to not to be repetitive, but the idea that all of these 7 components need to be in play so that they can be integrated, continuously monitored, and behind them is that push towards intentionality. Go ahead, Melissa. Thank you.
And so when we think about the fact that this work has been ongoing since September of 2023, we really wanted to provide you with a quick snapshot and glimpse into where the work is headed over the near term. So you can see on the left-hand side, when we're thinking about those different sections of what will become the comprehensive literacy framework, you can see concurrently right now, we are doing work on both that foundational component section as well as the evidence-based framework section. So by spring of this year, of 2026, we are hoping that the foundational component section, as well as the evidence-based framework section, will be completed, and we will be presenting them for peer review throughout our review process across both agencies. So as I had mentioned earlier, we spoke about our internal expert advisory team. In addition to that team, we also have a core team that consists of our other colleagues within the center, as well as our support from our Office of Early Childhood. And that team is a smaller team, really focused on drafting each of the sections. So doing the initial research, collaborating with colleagues across the agencies for inputs, and really putting together that initial draft of both those foundational foundational components, as well as that draft of each of those 7 sections that Deirdre just mentioned that will comprise the evidence-based framework. In addition to that, as that drafting is taking place, we have also disseminated, which we will talk about on the next slide, I promise it's coming. We have also disseminated our comprehensive landscape survey. So as we are drafting those foundational pieces, we are also gaining inputs from our external stakeholders, which will then be incorporated into our final drafts that we present for review. So the survey has been published, and it is active and will be out through the end of March, of which then we will get our inputs back and be able to incorporate that before we present our final drafts for review. You can see on this timeline, the double arrows kind of present a decision point. At that point, we will have our initial draft complete, and then we begin to think about what does this look like in terms of implementation. So what is that implementation going to look like at both the local level and the state level? And so we're really hoping to build kind of consensus and support for statewide dissemination as we look forward across this timeline. So you can go ahead and move to that next slide.
So this then, just to provide you with some context for the survey, some of you may have already received a link to it depending on the various channels of communication that you participate in with the state. But we wanted to give you a little bit of context, and again, is just to deepen a little or provide more detail on what Erin mentioned as the role of the work in the further development of the framework. In working both with our partners at the Department of Ed, the U.S. Department of Ed, as well as NCSL, as well as a network of state peer policymakers that we have, not policymakers, but folks that work within educational agencies in various states. We have worked to create a network of upwards of 10 to 15 offices with whom we collaborate on a regular basis. The collaboration is fairly informal, so that we are getting inside scoops about what works and what doesn't work. And we've been significantly guided in particular by some work that has been happening in New Hampshire around the development of a survey. We have been told repeatedly and really have bought in significantly to this idea that state stakeholders have to have a voice in what this framework looks like. And their feedback needs to be represented within the framework itself for a couple of reasons. First of all, the framework is intended to support instruction and learning in the state. So we need to hear from the folks who are both teaching and learning through parents. We want to round out and deepen those essential literacy components that we mentioned, the 7 components. With the thought behind it that we don't have any way of believing that we can cover it all. We want to hear from others to make sure that we haven't missed important priorities, and also to help us develop a prioritization of what really matters to Connecticut's stakeholders, so that that framework can have an emphasis on the areas that matter to Connecticut. And finally, the survey is hopefully a tool, a mechanism by which we begin to engage additional voices in the development of the framework. We provide transparency about what the state is hoping to share in this framework. And we are hoping to view it as a mechanism by which to support the implementation of it at local levels. So across, that is the box on the right-hand side where you see the role of survey results. Across the middle, which may or may not be may or may not be easy to see, the primary stakeholders for this survey are administrators, district and school leaders, educators of all kinds, paraprofessionals, specialists, content area teachers, as well as K-12 teachers, as well as early childcare providers. Families and caregivers are being offered this survey, and community members in particular. Big, broad category, but that is where we are hoping to hear from folks in the community and what they value in terms of literacy. We've discussed the purpose of it. And in terms of dissemination, we have so far, the survey has been live for about 2 weeks. We have so far used the sort of formal mechanisms within the CSDE using various listservs. The council will hopefully play a role in helping us disseminate this further to entities that we are not yet reaching. Any professional contacts that folks might have that might be interested in providing their insights, and then the community outreach as well. Could you skip to the next one, Melissa, please? So coming down here, as you might imagine, to the ask here is we are hoping, requesting your assistance in disseminating this survey to your various areas of context and communication. Each one of you holds a very different role in the overall educational ecosystem, and potentially represents a group of contributors that we don't yet have access to. So the effort here is to make the dissemination as broad as absolutely possible. A second piece further on, if you recall the slide that Erin talked about where there were 2 double blue arrows in the middle, is that after we have developed the work, we are hoping to engage focus groups to talk about implementation, to hear from folks across the entire range of stakeholders about how to implement this in a way that is both being used as an accepted model for what instruction looks like, as well as for what feels right in terms of implementation. And then again, also the final concept is just to help us make Connecticut stakeholders more aware overall of the purpose of this work. Go ahead, Melissa. I think let me turn this one to Erin.
And so finally, we thought this was appropriate, putting the literacy pieces together. We know that across the state, we have done a tremendous amount of work focusing on improving student literacy outcomes. But as learners and as educators, like we had stated, we want to be involved in that continuous improvement cycle. So the comprehensive literacy framework is really kind of that next step in hoping to improve literacy learning for all students across that birth to grade 12 spectrum through building agency consensus and interagency collaboration. Again, critical that we are focusing on that birth to grade 12 age band. Engaging and assuming both that continuous improvement at the state and local levels. And then, as Deirdre spoke about, really enhancing Connecticut's literacy profile on that national stage. We want to remain at the forefront for all of our learners across the state. So really, it is our hope that this literacy framework will really kind of put those literacy pieces together to continue support all of our learners across the state. So with that, we are going to pause. And Deirdre and I would welcome any questions, thoughts, feedback. We know it was a lot of information to present in a short amount of time, but hopefully we were able to provide you some context as well as some content that might be forthcoming.
Deirdre and Erin, I certainly am appreciative of the depth and scope of what you presented. I think what certainly was relevant to me is really began with your first slide and seeing the 4 main buckets of work and how this all fits together with each one of those pieces, where it belongs. So thank you for that. Any other comments or insights about Deirdre and Erin's presentation on the framework?
Just wanted to add that Kati will be sending the information for you to forward to your contacts, listservs, people you know. We really appreciate your assistance in this and getting the word out. How many are we up to now? We were over 500, just over Friday.
I looked yesterday, and I believe yesterday we were at around 570. As you might imagine, the bulk of those were in the actual within districts and schools, educators as well as administrators. Thus sort of emphasizing how important it is for us to get this information out and hear back from parents and families, caregivers of all kinds, as well as members of the community. Just to add in, and this just occurred to me as I'm looking at both Dr. Coyne and Dr. Oldham, that even though this is a birth to 12 function, we are preparing kids ultimately to go to college and to graduate college and become active, effective folks in the workforce. And I know that aligns very directly with what our governor feels is super important. So within that stakeholder role of educator, there is a stakeholder that is intended for university faculty. So this is not being limited to K-12 or birth to 12 educators, but it does go beyond that. We need to hear from EPPs and others that teach students who are coming out of our public systems what students need in order to be successful. So certainly we appreciate any efforts you might be able to provide to support that too.
And I'm just going to ask Dr. Coyne if you have any other comments since your name was dropped earlier in terms of your own contribution and participation.
I just want to say again how appreciative I am of the work that the center has done and Deidre and Aaron have done. It's just what Stephen was saying, just an incredibly important document for Connecticut to have, and the sort of comprehensiveness and the inclusiveness of it is really great. So nothing but kudos to the folks that have been really putting this together and seeking feedback and guidance. So I'm really excited about this.
Thank you. Dr. Hickey, would you like to introduce the next two presenters?
It would be most honored. And Deirdre and Aaron, thank you so much. As always, you were just so eloquent, and your work is really important. And I know it's our work at the center and our work at the State Department of Education. And as Stephen Hernandez mentioned, our commissioner and her thinking around this being the whole, right? So thank you all so very much for that. Now we're on to another presentation. Now this was something that the council had requested earlier around special education. And what's so exciting is we have two people. So it's going to be Dr. Oldham, who is going to be working with Dr. Stoltz. Dr. Oldham, in case you didn't know it, I do have some bios here. She's the chair and associate professor in the Department of Education at the University of St. Joseph, where she leads teacher education programs and master programs for practicing teachers. She earned her PhD in special education from University of Connecticut, and her research focuses on supporting students with learning disabilities, particularly reading disabilities, and she's been published in Exceptional Children and Learning Disabilities Research and Practice. Through her leadership, scholarship, and teaching, she's committed to preparing educators to implement evidence-based practices that best improve outcomes for students with disabilities. And then Dr. Stoltz, I need to pull up yours as well. Many of you know Dr. Stoltz from perhaps when she was in Bloomfield or Hartford, or perhaps with the CAPS work that she'll be talking about today through the master class. But let me pull up your bio. Why am I having a hard time with that? Do you want to introduce yourself while I'm doing that, Dr. Stoltz? And I'll get the PowerPoint up and ready. How about that?
Okay, deal.
Okay, thank you. Sorry about that.
No, it's quite all right. So I'm not going to read my bio. It's somewhere in here as well. but I'm very pleased to be able to present to you something that is near and dear to my heart today. As a lifelong educator, starting in general ed, asking my principal in the Coventry schools to move me every year so I could actually see the development of reading in real life, and saw from pre-K to grade 3 the process of those students who just for whatever reason did not attain grade level functioning. So my idea about being a reading consultant led me toward being a special educator. And I've loved working with students at all ages and grades in my teaching career before moving to eventually being the senior director of special education in the Hartford Public Schools, 3,400 students with IEPs. I wanted to know every single one of them and their stories. And then after being in the Hartford schools for a number of years with 14 different jobs, including being a literacy coordinator, I was asked to join the team in Bloomfield Public Schools as the chief academic officer. So still very passionate about public education and glad to be here. So Dr. Hickey, we're going to start, all right?
All right, I am up and ready. Would you like me to advance this?
Not yet.
Not yet.
Yeah, the title, as Deirdre spent some time on the title of your presentation, I think it brings our mindset together because this really does fit in this presentation, fits for the council in a little bit different way than it fits for the audience it was intended. The Science of Reading, I was approached by CAPS to do some accessible reading instruction for each one of the elements, the 5 elements, to the coaches who are former literacy directors or chief academic officers, special ed directors, and of course, former superintendents. And so the coaches work in teams of leadership coaches so that we're always looking ahead, not just to the what, but the how and how implementation can happen to ensure that every student, inclusive with students with disabilities, can access instruction. So I did ask Dr. Oldham to kind of do this presentation with the view in mind. So we are going to be tossing the ball back and forth as it comes to the different slides here. And we will have time for questions. Dr. Hickey? So you are really about to see what this particular set of masterclass webinars looks like. I've often believed that, as Deirdre and Erin did, we need to connect the dots. So our agenda, these are the talking points presented mostly every session, of which we have 4 webinars: the purpose, the process, and the payoff. Of course, whenever you bring a group of people together, specifically a group of educators, we want to ensure that we are developing as a team a shared belief about what accessible reading instruction looks like. What is it? We've looked at the research and we've looked at how leadership matters with regard to implementation. And then, of course, in every webinar, we've had opportunities for each one of our team of coaches to share their own professional and personal stories. And in fact, as part of this webinar, this presentation today, I will divulge just a few stories that some of the coaches have experienced about implementation of the science of reading. Next slide, please. So the 3 Ps. our purpose. Why are we here today? Well, it's so that you can see what the beliefs and constructs have been in defining and strengthening accessible reading. If you think of teacher skills, we have many talented teachers in Connecticut. We're so fortunate, well educated, so many programs and approved curricula that the teachers have in hand. We also are considering students' learning needs. So here's the content. How are our students approaching and succeeding with that content? So the process of the masterclass webinars have really focused with 2 books. If you can see this book that I have in hand, each one of the coaches has it. It's The Shifts to Improve Special Education, published by Nathan Levinson. I believe he's a Massachusetts, very local educator, and he sees many possibilities about enhancing general education to enable students to experience some of the strategies that we tend to reserve for special education. So across the webinars, we've spent time talking about enhancing memory, sustained attention, inhibitory control, which includes emotion, focus, and planning. So I'm just going to stop there for a second. Hey, Dr. Oldham, are any of these terms that we've added here for accessible instruction and executive functioning familiar to you in terms of your own work as a professor?
Yeah, absolutely. So we talk a lot about this in teacher education, thinking about how do we prepare every teacher to make the general education curriculum a place where all learners have access to those skills. So what are the things from special education that we need every elementary teacher to know, every secondary teacher to know? How do we center these executive skills and help our pre-service candidates understand that, and our current teachers getting master's degrees understand how these can be really important parts of both the process and the payoff?
Thank you so much. And
Excuse me
again,
one
this
second.
aligns.
Oops, sorry. No, I just want to say, I know that a lot of the council members have participated in the masterclass. I'm not sure they've all been part of this newer part. So I'm just curious, because I know like Dr. Gillis kicks it off every year, the new cohort, but some of the others? Gary, when was that, like 2 years ago? When did you participate? What cohort? Do you remember?
I believe it was 2 years ago. At this point, I can barely remember anything except snow.
Me too.
But I believe it was 2 years ago. Yeah, I'm pretty sure it was 2 years ago, and it was great,
right.
by the way.
Well, my husband and I are always like, oh yeah, we bought that like maybe 2 years ago, but then we always add on like 10 years because that's really when we really did it or bought it. But now, and Stanford, Dr. Lucero, was your district part of it too at some point? Oh, can't hear her, but all right. I was just curious who else was involved. I couldn't remember. Okay, go ahead, Dr. Soltz. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So our goal today, our payoff for you, is so that you have some more information about some of this particular masterclass and webinar series that has been offered to our executive leadership and literacy coaches, so that new superintendents who are involved in this are understanding and actually practicing their own executive functioning skills as part of the webinar structure. Of course, we're always looking at student outcomes. As Dr. Oldham mentioned, all students, including students with disabilities, will demonstrate growth as measured by any of the SOR, Science of Reading assessments. Melissa, next slide, please. So in connecting the dots, we just want you as council members, and of course, the participants in the webinar series, to always look at how these shifts, how these elements connect. We know we're using the science of reading elements such as phonics, vocabulary, comprehension, phonemic awareness, that we're using these practices of executive functioning skills to access that reading instruction, specifically for students with disabilities. We're always mindful that the K-3 reading curricula models and programs are for all students, tier 1 instruction. And then the book, we actually focus on the first shift, first 3 shifts. And then from a CAPS perspective, each one of those coaches have a look for tool that's chock filled with all of the explicit instruction that we would expect to see in any given classroom. There also is a UDL section that has been added to that look for tool, just for your knowledge. And so as we progress and deepen our own knowledge on executive functioning and what it looks like in classrooms during reading instruction, we can tie it to those look for tools and UDL, Universal Design for Learning. Melissa, next slide, please. Thank you. So I think that many of us have heard of multimodal instruction, how different modes like visual, auditory, kinesthetic, and tactile are made available for students so that we point out visual supports, charts, images that may be in a classroom, auditory cues, sounds that may help students to hear different sounds, kinesthetic, and tactile, just like some of the lessons that we see in foundations. We're familiar with brain breaks. We know as adults, even though in this 90-minute meeting, we really haven't taken a brain break. Sometimes a brain break is just to step away from the screen or the classroom, look out a window, open a book, or look at a chart. It doesn't have to always be a break. Teachers are adept already at using actionable feedback. They point out error patterns so students are able to monitor and self-monitor their own mistakes and errors. But what we don't spend a lot of time with is what's emboldened on the top here. How do students sustain and focus attention and effort? We give them a lot of work. We know that we expect rigor, but do we actually instruct students on how to lengthen their attention span, what to focus on, etc.? And if I look at the previous presentation by Deirdre and Aaron, I just took a few notes, and Ashley, these may resonate with you. Certainly the CSDE priorities around a core literacy belief. And I believe in my many decades of being in the classroom and in leadership roles, that knowing the skill of teachers is equally important to knowing the skills of students. How are they receiving what we're teaching? And so knowing that students don't always come in with good organizational tasks or being able to prioritize information, maybe at a simple level, but when the cognitive load increases, they run out of cognitive gas. We know that if information does not get into our working memory, that it's probably not getting into our short or long-term memory as well. So any comments before we proceed more deeply into executive functioning, either Ashley or anybody in our audience here on our council? Okay, next slide, please. So it was important to our council, to the CAPS coaches, sorry, that we had a working definition of our belief system.
Ellen, I don't mean to interrupt you, but it looks like
you.
Superintendent Highsmith has his hand raised. I just wanted
Oh,
to.
that's
if you
awesome.
could see that.
Yes. Thank
No,
you so much, Superintendent Highsmith.
Yeah, I really just wanted to thank the two of you for this, to have executive functioning in there in particular. I think it's underappreciated. The importance of it is underappreciated, so much so that we see some issues with executive functioning with our freshmen. So that the middle school hired an executive functioning coach to work with students and teachers before our kids even sort of get to high school. So it's good to see that I could get away from a focus on the cost of special ed or what IEPs look like and really get to the instructional part for students with disabilities. So I'm very excited to see that and just wanted to acknowledge that.
Thank you. And Superintendent Highsmith, your comment leads to my other two comments, so perfect timing. I think that in Deirdre and Aaron's presentation, one of those circles, I believe, which was important to the commissioner, every student prepared and engaged. That engagement, that preparation, as you're seeing for your freshmen, that needs to be taught as early as possible. So our linkage to early childhood and considering those ages when students are so receptive to understanding attention and effort is so important. And then Attorney Hernandez, your comment on a whole and full life approach. This goes beyond our responsibility for students with disabilities who may not leave our district until 22 or 23. This is a full life approach. And I'm sure many of us used our working memory, our attention to the snow, our problem solving, our organization, all those executive functioning plans to even figure out how do I fit in everything that needs to be done despite snow days. So thank you, Superintendent Highsmith. So then the belief system continues as a theory of action, which I'm sure is familiar to you all, that if every district aligned tiered instruction, which we know what that looks like, explicit, systematic, etc., to the learning needs of every student, then all teachers, which I know, Ashley, you're already working on, would implement accessible reading instruction as a companion element in Tier 1. Next slide, please. Oh, yes, on the left-hand side. As a result, student reading achievement will increase for students with and without disabilities. Those students that have not been diagnosed with a disability but may still need that organization. It's very important when you get to 9th grade, if not before. So I'm just going to move this out of, oh, nope. Could you go back to this one? So this was the latest data that I could come up with when I gave the very first webinar back in the fall. I just want you to take a look at this. The proxy, just want you to know, under the purple box, that means all students. These are 3rd graders, students with disabilities versus all students. So our state target for long-term reading is we would like to have all of our, I think it's 75%. I'm having a hard time reading this, but trying to get to 75% of all students at grade level in grade 3. That's our target. If we include students with disabilities into the purple or blue chart here, the bar chart, then we have attained 67.9%. So all means all, we still have work to do. But when you look more deeply at students with disabilities, 49.6%, we have a lot more work to do. For those of you who have had any experience in special education, even in the identification process, the evaluation to identification process, we're examining their executive functioning skills. We know students have short attention spans who may be diagnosed with ADHD. We know students who may have difficulty with their working memory because they come to us with a diagnosed learning disability. And so we do, I think, have an entrance path to this. Next slide, please, Melissa. So, Ashley, as you look at this wheel of the elements of executive functions, which one speaks to you as something that you spend a lot of time with your own students at St. Joseph's?
Yeah, that's a great question. So we talk a lot about cognitive load and how to understand the cognitive flexibility that is necessary to engage with complex texts, to become strong writers, and helping pre-service educators to understand the constraints on their own working memory through guided tasks, to understand that construct first and foremost as it relates to themselves. And then what might it look like or feel like for you to engage in a task where your working memory is really taxed? And what are all the things that you do as a skilled reader and writer to persist through a complex text, right? And then that leads us to think about how do we create instruction for students that leverages things like thinking aloud, so they can make visible to their students those executive functions that just happen in the quiet, right? You don't see them happening, but they're the magic that's going on. So we talk about all these things as it relates to reading. We talk about all these as it relates to writing. How do you understand the high level of these tasks? And really thinking about what do we assume students can do that we have not taken time to teach them. And if you unpack things with this lens, you start to realize how many things a learner has to hold at once and all those decisions they make. And how can you teach using explicit and systematic instruction and scaffolding to support all of these functions of your children and your adolescents that you're teaching?
So Dr. Oldham, as you look at the bright yellow section of this wheel, attention, inhibition, I hear, I see, I read about some of the difficulties students have with their own emotional control, self-regulation, that really impedes their ability to even be present during the classroom. They may be physically there, but they are either disruptive to others or to themselves. Do you pay attention, so to speak, to this as part of the syllabus with your students there?
So one way that we do this, one framework that we teach students is called self-regulated strategy development, Harrison Graham. So we teach it mostly in the context of writing, but how do you talk about that with students and talk about self-management? And, you know, the first start to any of this is to tell students what it is. Right? You talk to students about working memory. You talk to them about attention and self-management and goal setting. And you allow them to list some of the feelings they're having about a task and then turn those into positive self-statements and goals that you can work on managing with them. You know, what are things that you say to yourself when you're doing something you love to do? Like, I can do this. I've done this before. I know what I'm doing, right? And how do you teach students to make a connection to something in their life that they feel like a strong, capable learner on, to something that they're a new learner on? And how do we help them make those positive self-statements? How do we teach them to, not just say to them, you're off task, you're not paying attention? How do we center self-management instruction so that they become the ones involved in setting their goals, involved in self-monitoring, involved in noticing when they've had an attentional shift? And I think the thing that excites me most and excites students most is that these are things that are very teachable, right? I often heard in my life in schools, and I have a child with a learning disability myself who, the testing tells you all sorts of things about where he struggles, right? Struggles with executive skills. But what are we doing? There's a lot we can do. And I think this wheel, through training, allows teachers to understand themselves as learners and thinkers, because we all engage in these. And then how do we explicitly teach these things to our students?
I'm so excited to know that this is already happening in your classroom, your expectations, and all those teachers that will be leaving you and entering hopefully all our Connecticut schools. So thank you, Dr. Oldham, for being at the forefront of this. Next slide, please. So now let's just take a little bit of executive functioning and how it does relate to, by example, phonemic awareness and phonics, 2 of the 5 elements of the science of reading. So if you think about working memory, how you are paying attention right now to this material, you are activating your own working memory. Students, as Dr. Oldham just said, they have a lot to process. So we expect them to hold and manipulate sounds and letters, and then practice things like rhyming, initial consonant substitution or deletion, blending consonants, etc., syllables as they get older. We expect with cognitive flexibility that even when they are doing these activities like manipulating sounds, they have to be flexible enough to understand, well, am I working with a rhyme, the initial consonant, all the final consonants that come together, blends, etc. So there's a lot going on as information is being presented, all the while sustaining attention, focus, and inhibition. So think about those buckets. And that's not all of the executive functionings. If you remember the slide previously, there's a lot going on just to teach phonemic awareness and phonics. So my go-to book is one of the authors that did some of the research that I've been following. Her name is Kelly B. Cartwright, and it's a little blurred, so maybe I have to put anyway, it's called Executive Skills and Reading Comprehension, a Guide for Educators. I will send that to Kati, and she can put that in the agenda, the minutes that you'll receive soon. Dr. Hickey, could you advance the slide, please? Similarly, building executive functionings for comprehension and vocabulary. If you think about the words that 9th graders are experiencing, their vocabulary that they're developing in their content areas, hopefully they have learned along the way that words that maybe have been in math are also going to show up in English too, so that they can understand that there's the word parallel that can be used with characters, can be used with math. But this isn't happening if they aren't activating their working memory, having that cognitive flexibility, and then sustaining attention in order to work on the material in front of them. It's a lot. Dr. Hickey?
Can I add
So-
one thing? Sorry, can I
Oh,
add one
sure.
thing? You know, and I think
Always.
this is where, you know, we really try to get pre-service and in-service teachers to understand that we don't, you know, with strategy instruction, you don't post it, explain it, and expect it, right? You need to do lots and lots of teaching of it, right? That, you know, when we're thinking about what it takes to become a good comprehender and all these different ideas, and you're creating that situation model, it requires a lot of cognitive flexibility. It's taxing. And we sometimes throw at strategies to help with that without then working through those strategies with learners in really carefully constructed ways to help support their working memory, help to model what it looks like to have inhibition control, help to model all the things that happen from planning. And I think we underestimate in instruction how long it takes to support a student who's struggling in this area, how much repetition, how many trials, and how much focus and intensity is needed. But it's so critically important. And we do have research to suggest that you can teach this and it does have a meaningful impact for students. When we think about, you know, the National Center on Intensive Interventions framework for database individualization, which what do we do when students are not responding to what we're doing, right? One of those variables of intervention taxonomy intensity is looking at executive skills and looking at how explicit and systematic is the instruction. I just feel like those two things go hand in hand when we're trying to support students who struggle the most. And in this case, it's a really important both what we teach and how we teach it in this regard can be extremely powerful for kids who struggle the most to learn to read and to write.
Agreed. Dr. Oldham, would you mind taking this slide here, which is just a sample of the research that we examined during the webinars?
Yeah, and I think it's, you know, we know that these processes that we're talking about can really be important in bridging word recognition, comprehension outcomes for students. And that we know that students with disabilities have persistent challenges in some of these critical areas of reading. And it can be kind of depressing to look at the long-term outcomes around improvements in reading when you look at the kids who struggle the most. However, I think it also can be very empowering because we see things that children with strong executive functions, you know, have really rich access to important vocabulary. They can engage with the increasingly complex text that the Common Core demands with more confidence. However, right now we know that there are a lot of students who, you know, continue to even struggle to really master critical things like phonemic awareness, which is why all of our statewide efforts are so critically important, and how we train teachers pre-service, how we support in-service teachers, curriculums that can support and scaffold all of this work are critically important. So yeah, I think it's really interesting. You know, the research on executive skills has been around for a long time in special education. I think the attention to its critical role in the broader conversation around the science of reading is very exciting, and Dr. Cartwright is really leading the way in that regard.
Yeah. Thank you, Dr. Oldham. Next slide, please. So to your point, Ashley, these two pieces of information, this was actually from an earlier research article that Dr. Cartwright did. And we have seen that students that do have strong executive functioning skills are better equipped. We understand why now, because each one of those executive functioning skills contribute to integrating the information, paying attention to it from the get-go, and then being able to monitor their own comprehension. Next slide, please. So most importantly, what does it look like in classrooms? I have seen teachers who are mindful of executive functioning skills, that they practice cognitive flexibility and call blending and segmenting sounds as one of those opportunities to build that cognitive flexibility. So as you said earlier, Ashley, that we identify what it is they're doing. What brain tool are you using? And so when that starts along the same pathway as the science of reading instruction, then that explicit systematic instruction includes executive functioning skills. It gets practiced, right? What we practice, we improve on. Certainly sustaining attention in our modern day classrooms is really a difficult activity, but it's a lifelong skill. And so embedding time tasks, gradually increasing time on task, wait time, response time, and also providing that explicit actionable feedback to students. We do that with students with disabilities. Let's make that happen for all students. Next slide, please. So in the beginning, in the process statement and the purpose, in looking at what teachers do so well, we have all seen teachers do every one of these skills. Their tools are endless, but what I think needs way more attention is what students need. And we know that in order for students to be truly successful at organizing and planning their own lives, then each one of these executive functioning brain tools need to be present. Next slide, please. So as we're wrapping up this, so we have a little time before we adjourn, I think this slide is very important, especially when you look at the students who are included most of the time, but not all of the time. So hopefully you can see this slide. The first three blue bars are students with speech and language impairments, learning disabilities, and students identified as having other health impairments, which is inclusive in Connecticut of students with ADHD. Imagine the ability of these three groups of students to be spending 100% of the time in their general ed setting, with executive functioning skills starting early and their understanding of their own ability to pay attention, plan, and organize tasks. These three disability areas seem to me like we could improve the percentage of students and their school days spending with non-disabled peers. I also wonder, students with, I call it emotional disability, not emotional disturbance, but students with emotional disabilities, if they learn to self-regulate and give the vocabulary words to identify what they were experiencing, would that label of being having an emotional disability be as prevalent? And even if it did have that prevalence, maybe they would spend time with their non-disabled peers at a higher percentage so that they would have role models in their own classrooms. Next slide, which I think is the last one. Yes. So we don't really have time to do this ourselves, but I want you to know what happens during these webinars. So in using the book by Levinson, his watchword, forethought, not afterthought. Yesterday's strategies aren't right for today's needs. I think we would all agree with that. And so we spend time during each webinar answering questions, not just me talking, of course. It's more of a workshop. And so I want each coach to understand their role in this type of change. So I'm going to close with a quick story, and we have about a minute or two for questions. One of the coaches said that she has been in education for her whole life. She's now a retired coach, former literacy director, and she said she had never thought of executive functioning as a precursor or partner to reading instruction. And she still tutors as well as being a coach to superintendents. In her coaching, she cannot stop thinking about executive functioning. And since we started this series of webinars, she and her tutee, her student, have focused on executive functioning. And from her perspective and from her students, they both feel and agree that the student has made exponential progress in his achievement because now he understands what the issues are and what he is capable of doing. So with that, we have 1 minute. Anybody have a quick question or comment? Certainly you can reach out to Ashley and I individually after this meeting via email or however.
I just wanted to give a shout out to the competencies for structured literacy and dyslexia that center a lot of these things. So I wanted it to be clear that this is not like just in our little part of the world here where I am, that there's ed prep around the state are really working through this and thinking about how do we ensure that what we're doing today to prepare educators for your classrooms aligns with the most current research for all learners.
Thank you, Ashley. Dr. Coyne?
Yeah, thank you. Just wanted to say how much I appreciated the presentation, and this sort of idea of thinking about executive functioning is really important, and especially for kids with disabilities. So thank you. Really, really nice job. Ashley, you too. But I also just want to make sure that we don't lose sight of the fact that, you know, the primary way that kids with disabilities improve their reading is through direct explicit instruction in reading skills. And, you know, and so things like executive functioning should be incorporated within that kind of high quality teaching, and should never be replacing that kind of teaching. So I think,
Absolutely.
you know, the main thing we do is intensify the explicit and systematic instruction in very specific skills. And so I just want to make sure that we don't lose sight of that's the primary way that kids with disabilities develop enhanced
and it's
reading
not
skills.
It's not right. And that's why I shared the concept of the database individualization framework, right? We're thinking about explicit teaching and how do we make things more intensive, right? So never would you do this in a decontextualized way, that this is within the context. I totally agree.
Right.
Systematic and explicit instruction for sure.
Yeah, and I would be concerned if coaches were shifting from coaching their interventionists and teachers to teaching like reading content to executive functioning. So I just want to make sure that we're not, I don't think you're saying that, but just want to be clear.
Yeah. Thank you so much. Yes. Especially phonemic awareness. It's a perfect fit with each one of the elements of the science of reading. Any other comments before we adjourn? Dr. Hickey, thank you for putting up the remaining meetings. Seeing none, thank you very much for your engagement on this snowy day. Hopefully you think a little bit about all of the elements of this meeting because it was a lot of content and very important work. So thank you all for your engagement in today's meeting, and we'll see you on March 17th. Meeting adjourned.